I wanted to come here and just take a moment and read the words of Coretta Scott King. I have her book called Coretta, My Life, My Love, My Legacy. And this is her story. Not her story plus Dr. King, but just her story, which oftentimes we don't get to hear about her and the strength that she must have had in order to be the wife, the helpmate of someone as dynamic as Dr. King. So that's why we're here today. In this beautiful, beautiful place. Gonna find somewhere to have a seat. And I'm going to share with you her introduction to her book. Here we go. It's as nice a spot as there ever was. Thank you, Janice Cahill Zimmerman family, for donating this lovely bench. These words are Coretta's words. There is a Miss King. There is also Coretta. How one became detached from the other remains a mystery to me. Most people have followed my career from afar, or even given me a second thought. Know me as Miss King, the wife of, the widow of, the mother of, the leader of. Makes me sound like the attachments that come with my vacuum cleaner. In one sense, I don't mind that at all. I'm proud to have been a wife, a single parent, and a leader. But I am more than a label. I am also Coretta. Isn't it time you know the integrated, holistic woman? One spirit, one soul, one destiny. In reading this memoir, I hope somehow you see Coretta. As I reflect upon the chapters of my life, peering into the margins and fine print as well as at the boldly illuminated headlines, I am simply amazed. I was born on April 27, 1927, in Heiberger, Alabama, at a time and a place where everything I would eventually become was impossible even to imagine. Who could have dreamed that a little girl who began life as a part-time hired hand picking cotton for $2 a week in the piercing hot sun would rise to a position that allowed her to help pick U.S. mayors, congresspersons, and even presidents? Or that in the 1950s and 1960s, when a woman's place and sometimes her imprisonment was clearly defined as the home, I would be both an avowed homemaker and a liberated feminist, that I would be able to help build a human rights movement while also raising 4 beautiful children. And by no means did I dare think as a child that I would ever help create a more humane environment for African Americans. From my earliest childhood, whites regularly terrorized our family, and it was not a crime. In the 1940s and 50s, one dared not dream of equality under the law. We could not sleep in our beds without fear of being burned out by white vigilantes. We could not walk in the front door of an ice cream parlor without being shooed to the back. We had to step off the sidewalk and lower our eyes when a white person approached. This is the narrow door I entered as a young girl. It is not the same door from which I will exit. That was a beautiful statement. The movement did not only lift blacks, it elevated the entire nation toward a place of true respect, love, and justice that transcends race, color, or creed. I call that place the beloved community. The road to the beloved community is the road of nonviolence. The roadblocks are hate and prejudice. We are not there yet. But there are more doors open than ever before. We stand on the cusp of a new day, one brimming with possibilities that once lived only in the restricted passageways of our dreams. In my teen years, I spent a lot of time trying to discover who I was. I used to look at myself in the mirror and ponder why I had been placed on this planet. Sometimes I would grow nervous. It was as though I could perceive myself as another human being, someone much larger than a little country girl sitting on a bench in the backwoods of Alabama. I used to go out in the woods and sit for hours, thinking and meditating. Rodin's statue had nothing on me. I imagined myself seated next to the proverbial man in the moon, blasting off to adventures far past Heiberger. At 13, that was the only way I could transcend the small space I occupied. My mind left home long before I packed my physical bags. I hope that now, in some way, you will know this, Coretta. Of course, while my memoir is about me, it is about Martin too. Our lives were too inseparable to be perforated. Cutting us one from the other would leave a jagged edge. Yet I did have a life after Martin, just as I had a life before Martin. I have a purpose. I have a mission, and I have carried it out on the world stage. To discover what you're called to do with your life, I believe you have to be connected to God, to that divine force in your life, and that you have to continue to pray for direction. I did that. My life careened down roads I had never imagined traveling. I took on tasks requiring skills and wisdom I didn't have until circumstances demanded them. All this kept me on my knees, calling on God. Over the years, as I prayed for strength, I felt a sense of relief. I was doing God's work, I knew, and He would take care of me and my family. That didn't mean that nothing bad would ever happen. It didn't mean that at all. But pain is the price some people have to pay, and death can be a redeeming voice. It can promote change and advance the work of God's kingdom. I came to understand all this in the early days of the Montgomery movement, and the understanding I found then has never left me. I had a divine calling on my life, a charge, a challenge to serve not just Black people, but all oppressed humankind. That calling will be with me to the end. As my life unfolded, I saw a pattern. My value system formed and was strengthened through pain and sacrifice, not through talking the talk, but walking the walk in the line of fire. In Montgomery, Alabama, during the famous bus boycott, I came to understand that I was made of what pressures I could withstand without breaking or running away. I was not a crystal figurine, fragile or fearful. If I had been breakable, I would have been a major distraction to Martin. His concern for my safety and that of our children would have prevented him from being able to stand in a line of fire. Instead, he soon found that I could be trusted when facing trouble. When I look back on the harassment we endured, on the persecution of my husband and the threats to our lives, I am still amazed at what lies within me. We cannot know how far we can soar until we are tested. Strangely enough, I actually became stronger in crisis. I didn't understand that until I found myself in the midst of a tsunami. During that time in Montgomery, I felt an inner strength. It told me that if necessary, I could do it again and again. Did Martin ever understand how deep my inner calling was? I don't think so. It transcended even our marriage, and he sometimes struggled to capture its essence. Once, when we were talking about the importance of ensuring that our children receive a proper amount of attention from their parents, he blurted out, "You see, I am called, and you are not." I said to him, "You know, I've always felt that I have a call on my life, too. I have been called by God to do something, too, and I have to do it." Generally, Martin was very encouraging, and there were times when he was frustrated with himself, too. He wanted to be a father who was very involved in the lives of his children, but the movement required so much of his time. In any case, our debates about our best to take care of our children did not disturb me, because I knew exactly where he was coming from. He felt a similar pull, a similar pressure from God. I was married to Martin, but I was even more married to the movement and its mission of helping to create a beloved community of compassion, justice, and nonviolence. Was my path a lonely one? Yes, at times. You do not lose your husband, who is your best friend, and not feel lonely. But I was never alone. I had my mother and father, my mother-in-law and father-in-law, my sister and brother-in-law, my sister and brother, my nieces and nephews, my 4 wonderful children, and the King Center, which I envisioned as the West Point of nonviolence, and often thought of as my 5th child. I also felt the warmth embrace of that great crowd of witnesses, those yet unborn, who will live their best lives beyond limits because we dare to struggle, to put our lives on the line to make America and the world a better place. When I understood the places I could enter and the heights I could travel, I felt as though I were bringing many of you with me. The doors I entered were locked when I arrived, but through faith and pressure, they opened. Some of you have already walked through. The lessons I learned as a lobbyist, a teacher, an organizer, and most of all, as a single parent, felt teachable by the very fact that I was not missing an action in the midst of crisis. What did it take to stay on the civil rights battlefield after Martin was assassinated? I never knew if the same hate that killed my husband would claim my life or the lives of my 4 children. For years, I've endured death threats. There were bomb threats when I traveled. I had to vacate buildings, get off airplanes, and choose alternate forms of transportation. You never knew the stresses and strains I underwent as a woman in a male-dominated culture because I didn't complain, nor did I break. You never knew what it felt like to live in a fishbowl, to know that my conversations and whereabouts were constantly monitored by the government. So much so that Martin and I learned to talk in code. There was much I had to learn to do in the course of my life, and I did not have a blueprint. I could not call upon Martin as Martin had called upon me. I made mistakes, but I pray those will be charged to the lack of understanding and not to malicious intent. I learned how to lobby, how to advance human rights through the political system, from city councils to state houses to Congress to the White House itself. Through these struggles and these learnings, I hope you will see Coretta, the Miss King you may have the Miss King you might have heard about cares about thousands around the world and a thousands yet unborn. Coretta cares about people, one person at a time. Over the years, when I heard about problems involving staff members or neighbors or church colleagues, I got personally involved. I brought gifts to be a problem solver for those who were too easily dismissed. I called city council reps, mayors, housing departments. I called to stop eviction notices to help students get into college. I called to recommend good people for good jobs. I was accused of being a micromanager, and I have to admit that in many cases I was that and more. I suppose Coretta the person never received much attention because I always found it difficult to talk about myself. If I talked about interactions with people in which I was trying to make a difference in their lives, one person at a time, I felt it might create the impression that these acts of kindness were staged for the media. So I kept those personal kinds of things to myself. But now is the time to share the story I have wanted to tell for so long. In my first book, My Life with Martin Luther King Jr., my focus was on my husband, a man who paid the ultimate price for his commitment to creating a better world. At that time, I felt very strongly that the book had to be about Martin. Now I am turning the page. Now I think it's time you knew Coretta. Coretta Scott King, Atlanta, Georgia. Was that not powerful, y'all? I read that when I first picked up this book. I read it in the airport in Atlanta after leaving Atlanta from a Women Veterans Day Summit. And it was so amazingly powerful to me that I couldn't wait to share it with you all.